Hello, my name is Frank Bishop. I am a 35-year-old former Special Forces operative, now navigating the precarious waters of international trade at a bustling import-export firm in the heart of the city. The transition from military to civilian life has been less like shedding an old skin and more like weaving a new one, intricate and fragile. Tonight's confrontation, however, threatens to unravel those careful stitches with the brutality of a past that refuses to stay buried. As the city's clamor faded into the background, replaced by the eerie quiet of an alley lined with the backs of dimly lit restaurants and forgotten office buildings, I stood with Edna Charles by my side. Edna, with her sharp business acumen and gentle demeanor, was not only my supervisor but also the daughter of Anthony Charles, my late mentor, and her father who had served with me in darker times. Her presence was both a comfort and a reminder of the responsibilities I now bore. The shadows around us thickened, coalescing into the forms of 5 men, their intentions as clear as the switchblades glinting in the sickly yellow of the streetlights. Their leader, a broad-shouldered brute with eyes like steel traps, stepped forward. His name was Andrew, known in the undercurrents of the city for his quick temper and quicker fists. Jack Morton, a colleague fueled by a toxic brew of jealousy and ambition, lurked behind the unfolding scene. His smirk was a silent challenge, his role in orchestrating this ambush clear. He despised me, not for who I was, but for what I represented, a threat to his unearned supremacy within the corporate hierarchy. His disdain for my lack of a formal business degree, coupled with the respect I commanded, aided him like acid. Frank Bishop, Andrew's voice cut through the chill night air, his tone mocking yet curious. Never thought the great war hero would end up in a dead-end job like this. Or that you'd be so easy to corner. His words were meant to provoke, to degrade, but I kept my voice even, my stance relaxed yet ready. Life's full of surprises, Andrew. And I assure you, I'm not cornered yet. Beside me, Edna's slight intake of breath was the only sign of her tension. Her trust in my ability to handle the situation was implicit, her courage in the face of danger palpable. We were an unlikely duo, bound by past and present loyalties, standing firm against the encroaching threat. As the gang closed in, the alley became a stage for a showdown that seemed inevitable. The clatter of a distant trash can, the distant wail of a siren, everything heightened the sense of impending conflict. But beneath the surface, undercurrents of old connections and unspoken histories began to stir, the night air thick with more than just menace. Andrew paused, his gaze narrowing. I know you, don't I? From before. The moment hung suspended, a question mark at the end of a sentence yet to be finished. In the balance lay not just the outcome of this confrontation but the unraveling of stories left untold, of lives diverging and converging in the shadows of a city that never truly sleeps. The towering glass facade of the trade firm mirrored the gray skies overhead, a silent observer to the discord brewing within its walls. Inside, the atmosphere was just as charged, the air thick with the hustle of trade negotiations and the undercurrent of interpersonal dramas. At the heart of this storm stood Frank Bishop, his presence as unsettling to some as it was reassuring to others. Frank's integration into the corporate world had been a jarring transition, marked by suspicion and veiled contempt from those who valued pedigrees over proven merit. Jack Morton epitomized this breed of corporate climbers, silver-spooned and Ivy League nurtured, with a belief in his birthright to ascendancy. To him, Frank was an aberration in their pristine office landscape, a man who spoke the language of grit and endurance rather than that of leveraged buyouts and fiscal spreadsheets. Jack's office, perched on the higher floors with sweeping views of the city, was as much a command center as a sanctuary from the world he deemed inferior. From this vantage point, he orchestrated what he saw as just retribution against Frank, a daily gauntlet of impossible deadlines and complex tasks designed to undermine and, ideally, to oust the intruder in their midst. On the surface, his tactics were cloaked in the veil of professional rigor, but underneath, they were petty and vindictive, a war of attrition against a man who had faced actual wars. Jack's emails were curt, often copying senior leadership to subtly highlight any slight delay or misstep by Frank. In meetings, his questions to Frank were loaded, designed to expose any lack of conventional knowledge or to bait him into an emotional response. Contrastingly, Edna's office was a place of calm and understanding. As Frank's supervisor, she treated him with a kindness that spoke of deeper bonds, a respect forged through her father, Anthony, who had been more than a mentor to Frank. Anthony had been a beacon during the darkest times, and his teachings now lived on through his daughter. Her support was not born of pity but of belief in his capabilities and the potential for his unique experiences to enrich their team's dynamic. Their relationship was a point of contention for Jack, adding a personal sting to his professional jealousy. Edna's favorable treatment of Frank only fueled Jack's narrative that Frank was a charity case, a soldier out of his depth in the refined battlefield of corporate strategies. Yet, Edna remained unwavering, her actions reinforcing the ethos her father had instilled, valuing people for their character and their contributions, not their credentials. As the weeks turned into months, the strain of Jack's relentless pressure began to tell on Frank. He found himself staying later, poring over reports and projections, determined not to give Jack the satisfaction of seeing him falter. Yet, despite the exhaustion and frustration, a resilient part of him thrived. Each challenge surmounted didn't just bolster his position, it built his case for a different kind of leadership, a leadership grounded in reality, empathy, and the kind of resilience that can't be taught in a classroom. But as the office emptied and the lights dimmed to the soft glow of evening, the true test of Frank's resolve remained waiting in the shadows of the city's streets, a reminder that some conflicts followed you home, no matter how far you tried to leave them behind. As the digital clock on Frank's computer flipped to 7:03 p.m., the lingering buzz of the office slowly subsided into a quiet hum. Most desks were now empty, the flurry of the day's commerce replaced by the soft clicking of keyboards and the occasional rustle of papers. Frank and Edna, still at their stations, were wrapping up the remnants of a particularly grueling day, Frank battling the tail end of a report that Jack had smugly dropped on his desk hours past a reasonable deadline, and Edna sorting through the labyrinthine email trails that marked her meticulous oversight. The office around them felt increasingly desolate, a cavernous space echoing with the ghostly remnants of hurried conversations and ringing phones. Finally shutting down her computer, Edna glanced at Frank, her eyes conveying both empathy and fatigue. "Ready to call it a day?" she asked, her voice a mix of weariness and resolve. Frank nodded, the weight of the day settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. They gathered their belongings and headed towards the elevator, the quiet of the office around them stark against the muffled sounds of the city seeping through the windows. The elevator dinged softly as they descended, the digital numbers descending with them into the encroaching dusk of the city. Exiting the building, they were greeted by the brisk evening air, a stark contrast to the stale, conditioned atmosphere of the office. The street was dimly lit, the usual bustle of the day tapering off into scattered groups of people heading home and the occasional late-night wanderer. The city, a tapestry of light and shadow, seemed to hold its breath, as if sensing the impending confrontation. As they turned into a less frequented alley shortcutting their way to the metro station, the sudden clatter of a trash can lid spinning to the ground halted their steps. Shadows detached from the darkness ahead, coalescing into the forms of Andrew and his gang. The men's outlines were harsh against the flickering light of a nearby lamp, their faces set in grim determination. "Evening stroll, Frank?" Andrew's voice sliced through the chill air, his tone mocking yet tinged with a strange curiosity. His stance was confrontational, the implicit threat clear as his companions fanned out behind him, blocking any easy escape route. Edna's hand tightened on her briefcase, her posture rigid with tension. Frank moved slightly in front of her, a protective gesture born of instinct. His voice, when he spoke, was calm, betraying none of the adrenaline surging through his veins. "Andrew," he acknowledged, his tone neutral. "What brings you out this way?" Andrew smirked, stepping closer. "Just enjoying the night, like you. But then, I heard you'd be passing through. Thought we'd catch up, old friend." The word friend hung in the air, laced with irony. Frank's eyes narrowed slightly as he gauged the situation, his mind racing through potential strategies. His past life had trained him well for moments like this, but the stakes were different now. It wasn't just about survival, it was about protecting Edna, about not reverting to the man he once was. As tension coiled tight around them, a flicker of recognition seemed to cross Andrew's face. "Wait," he said abruptly, his expression shifting as he peered closer at Frank. "Frank Bishop? The Frank Bishop?" The question hung between them, a thread of past recognition that momentarily loosened the tension. This unexpected recognition shifted the dynamics, the shadows of forgotten connections starting to emerge from the depths of Andrew's memory. The night, filled with the potential for violence, now teetered on the brink of an unforeseen revelation. Under the dim glow of the street lamp, the alley was a chessboard of shadows and light, with Frank and Edna unwittingly positioned as central pieces. Andrew's eyes narrowed, his brain ticking through the archives of his memory where Frank's name had been stored, not as a foe, but as an ally in a forgotten chapter of his tumultuous life. "You're the Frank Bishop?" Andrew repeated, the aggression in his posture subtly ebbing as he connected the dots. A hint of respect, or perhaps it was recognition, altered the timbre of his voice. "You saved my cousin's life back in Kabul." "Hell, I didn't realize." "Man, you've changed." The gang members behind Andrew shifted uneasily, exchanging glances filled with confusion. They had come expecting a simple show of force, but the sudden change in their leader's demeanor left them uncertain. Jack, who had been lurking in the background, felt the control slip from his grasp. He stepped forward, frustration contorting his features. "What's this, Andrew?" "We had a deal," he hissed, trying to salvage the situation by reigniting the conflict. But Andrew ignored him, his focus entirely on Frank. "Yeah, we were both there when the market district went up. Never got a chance to thank you properly." His voice carried a genuine note of gratitude that seemed to muffle the urban noises surrounding them. Frank, still on high alert, relaxed marginally but kept his body angled protectively towards Edna. "That was a long time ago, Andrew." "I was just doing my job," he responded, the soldier in him never far from the surface. A chuckle escaped Andrew, softening his rugged features. "Job or not, you did more than most would. Can't let a debt like that go unpaid." He gestured to his gang, and as if a spell had been broken, they slowly withdrew, the tension draining from their postures like air from a punctured tire. Jack's face reddened, a vein throbbing at his temple. "Are you kidding me? After all the planning?" His voice was almost a shriek, his image of authority crumbling as he realized his manipulation had failed spectacularly. Ignoring Jack's tantrum, Andrew took a step towards Frank, extending his hand in a gesture that bridged the past and present. "I owe you." And an oath's an oath, no matter the years or the miles. As Frank shook his hand, the weight of the past momentarily anchored them in mutual respect, a soldier's camaraderie that transcended their current circumstances. Edna, witnessing the exchange, felt a mix of awe and relief. Her eyes met Frank's, and in that glance, there was an unspoken acknowledgement of the complexity of his past life. With Andrew's departure, the alley regained some of its ordinary calm, the earlier threat now diffused into the night air. Jack, however, remained, his figure deflated and his plans thwarted. He glared at Frank and Edna, the humiliation of the evening marking him more deeply than any physical wound. Frank, aware of the need to address the lingering threat Jack posed, turned to him with a steady gaze. "Jack, this isn't the way to settle whatever grievances you have. It's time we cleared the air, back in the office, with clear heads." As they left the alley, the city's pulse resumed around them, indifferent to the small human dramas unfolding in its veins. Frank's actions tonight had not only saved them from a potentially dangerous confrontation but had also laid the groundwork for a new alliance, one that might prove essential in navigating the treacherous waters of both his past and present lives. As the early morning sun cast its first golden rays over the city, filtering through the high-rise buildings and down into the quieter streets, Frank and Edna walked side by side in a companionable silence. The adrenaline of the previous night's confrontation had ebbed away, leaving room for reflection and the slow unspooling of Frank's past. They found an open cafe, the aroma of fresh coffee blending with the dawn's crisp air, inviting them to a small table by the window. As they settled in, Frank's gaze lingered on the bustling street outside, his mind turning over the events that had so unexpectedly linked his past life with his present. "Andrew and I were in the same unit for a while," Frank began, his voice soft, as if he was pulling threads from a delicately woven tapestry. "Kabul was a tough posting, harsh, unpredictable. But it's where you see what people are really made of." He paused, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. Andrew was different then, more focused, disciplined. War changes people, sends them on paths they never expect. Edna listened intently, her eyes reflecting both her concern and a deepening respect for the man who had become not just her colleague but her protector and friend. "And he just recognized you like that?" she asked, curiosity weaving through her words. "It seems he did. You don't forget the faces of those who've had your back when it counted most." Frank smiled slightly, the memory bittersweet. Saving his cousin, it was part of a bigger operation, but those moments, they create bonds that don't just dissolve. As they spoke, the earlier tension slowly diffused, replaced by the comforting routine of the morning crowd and the clink of coffee cups. Frank's revelations brought a new depth to their relationship, revealing layers of his character that went beyond the office persona. "The way Andrew stood down last night," Frank continued, "it wasn't just about the past. It's about acknowledging debts of honor, even outside the battlefield." His eyes met Edna's, steady and clear. "And it's about how we use our past to shape our future actions." Meanwhile, across town, Andrew sat with his own crew in a less refined setting, a stark garage lit by harsh fluorescent lights. The atmosphere was charged, his gang members restless with confusion and dissatisfaction after the night's turn of events. "I know what you're all thinking," Andrew addressed them, his tone commanding silence. "But Frank Bishop isn't just some corporate guy. He's one of us, in ways most will never understand. We owe him, and that's not a debt I plan to ignore." The gang exchanged looks, their respect for Andrew mingling with their newfound curiosity about Frank. The dynamics within the group shifted subtly, respect for Andrew's decision, although grudging, beginning to take root. Back at the cafe, Frank's phone buzzed, a message from another department head, seeking his advice on a difficult negotiation. It was a reminder of his dual roles, both in the office and beyond. He glanced at Edna, a silent acknowledgement of the complexities of their world. "As for Jack," Frank said, turning back to the conversation, "he's going to have to learn that intimidation and manipulation aren't how you win respect or loyalty. Not in the office, not anywhere." Edna nodded, her expression one of agreement and admiration. "And with Andrew's unexpected support, it seems you have more allies than you thought." As they rose from their seats, ready to face the day, the city around them awoke fully, bustling and vibrant. The events of the night had not only resolved a conflict, but had opened a channel for redemption and reconciliation, setting the stage for a new chapter in both their lives. The rhythm of the office had changed. There was a new current in the air, one that carried whispers of respect and wariness in equal measure. Frank Bishop walked through the corridors not just as a former soldier or a skilled negotiator, but as a man who had demonstrated a profound integrity and courage under fire. The respect he commanded now was palpable, a quiet acknowledgement from his colleagues of the metal beneath his calm exterior. His desk became a sort of unofficial hub, a place where younger employees came seeking advice not just on trade regulations or market trends, but on handling difficult situations with dignity and strength. Frank took these interactions seriously, using them as opportunities to instill a sense of ethics and teamwork, values he held dear. Across the office, Jack Morton's fall from grace had been both swift and stark. Once the epitome of unbridled ambition and ruthlessness, he found himself isolated, the power he had wielded so manipulatively stripped away by his own undoing. His attempts to intimidate Frank, culminating in the failed ambush with Andrew's gang, had backfired spectacularly, exposing his weaknesses rather than his strengths. In a quiet conference room, away from the buzz of the office floor, Jack sat across from Frank and Edna. The meeting had been Frank's idea, a final attempt to bridge the chasm that had opened between them. Frank's demeanor was not of triumph, but of conciliation. "Jack, this isn't just about what happened that night," Frank began, his voice even. "It's about how we move forward, how we learn from our mistakes." Jack, his pride battered but his survival instincts intact, nodded slowly. I didn't see it before," he admitted, his voice low. "I saw your background as a threat, not as something that brought something different, valuable to the table." The admission was painful but necessary, a first step toward rebuilding his career and his self-respect. Edna, ever the mediator, facilitated the dialogue, ensuring it remained constructive. "We all bring different strengths to the table," she said. "Recognizing and utilizing those strengths, that's what makes a team effective, not just individual achievements." Meanwhile, Frank's burgeoning relationship with Andrew brought a new dimension to his life outside the office. Andrew had introduced him to community projects, ways in which he could contribute to the city's underprivileged areas. Together, they worked on initiatives that used their leadership and survival skills for peacebuilding and youth training programs. It was a different kind of battle, one for the hearts and minds of those at risk of falling through society's cracks. In quieter moments, often while looking out over the city from his apartment window, Frank reflected on his journey. The battles fought, both overseas and within the sterile confines of corporate offices, had shaped him in ways he was only beginning to understand. He thought of Anthony, Edna's father, who had once told him that the real battles were fought not on the field but within oneself. The city stretched out before him, lights twinkling like stars fallen to earth, each one a story, a life intertwined with countless others. Frank's thoughts turned to the future, to the possibilities that lay ahead. He had hopes of reducing conflicts, of building bridges where there had been barriers. And as he turned from the window back to the stack of papers on his desk, he carried with him not just the weight of past wars, but the promise of peace. The journey from soldier to peacemaker, from a lone fighter to a team leader, had been fraught with challenges, but as he prepared for another day, Frank knew that every step was a step towards something greater, not just for him, but for everyone.